Skadoosh. Been a little longer than I'd intended since the last time I did an episode of Animation Junkie, but Kung Fu Panda 3's out, so let's talk about that. Now, unfortunately, I haven't gotten around to talking about any of the other Kung Fu Panda movies in this series up to this point, and I had intended to do so. The first one in particular is really just such a comfort food movie for me. I love its pacing, I love its characters, I love its action, I love the music. It just gives me a warm feeling inside. The second one's also quite good, although I have to admit I haven't seen it again since it came out in theaters. But before even going into this one, I had a sinking feeling. I was getting a Shrek 3 vibe off that, and since I haven't covered the Shrek series on this either, I'll explain that briefly. Basically, I think the first two Shrek movies actually are quite good and hold up quite well. The third one has a whole lot of problems, but chief among them is the fact that they made the decision that Shrek cannot change and evolve, so he kept having to get reset back to the same grumpy ogre that we knew in the first Shrek. But by the third time, it was so contrived, the reason that they had to just have him be all grumpy, and any evolution as a character he had just gets completely undone. I was getting that vibe off the trailers for this, seeing that Po was going to have to teach Kung Fu to people and that he was not a very good teacher. It struck me as just this contrived reason to have Po be stumbling and confused and not that great at what he's doing, which just sets him back to where he was in the first one again. Now, unfortunately, that is kind of what happens to a certain extent, but this is really a case where the film starts out in a bit of a wonky place. The middle it moves things along, but it's nothing particularly memorable, but it builds to a really good climax. The third act of this movie really does save the whole thing. We get great, fun, inventive action. It pays off everything that's been going on up to that point really well on multiple levels. And I also really love most of the messages that are at the heart of this one. There's a whole lot of emphasis on self-exploration and knowing yourself, which is actually kind of an unusual lesson to have in a kid's movie because by and large it's an adult question, who am I? What is the essential essence of me? That's not something you'd expect to be tackled in a kid's movie, but they tackle it in a way that not only works, but I think is really going to be quite accessible to kids. Jack Black, as always, is this movie. He does fantastic voice work. He brings that same level of energy and fun that makes Po the character that you just love to see. Because even when he's stumbling and isn't quite sure what he's doing, he's got such gusto. I never get tired of Po. And as always, he does completely steal the thunder of anyone else on the screen. So the rest of the voices are fine. That includes the new blood. We get J.K. Simmons as a new villain, who is an interesting villain, and he does fine. And we got Bryan Cranston as Poe's father, and they're both fine. Neither of them are particularly exceptional, but I don't think that's necessarily because they didn't do much, just because really everybody lives in Poe's shadow in this series. That's kind of the reality of it. The fights are, I don't want to say they're not as good, but it takes longer for us to start getting the really good action set pieces. Normally, they've got them sprinkled across the movie. This time, the earlier ones, they're okay, they're fine, but again, it's the third act, it's the climax portion that really gives us the goods. That's where the whole thing comes together. That's where it delivers on the levels you want a Kung Fu Panda movie to deliver on. And like I said, in terms of core message of the things, I gotta give props to what the message is and how it's delivered. This is still probably gonna rate as my least favorite entry in the Kung Fu Panda series, just because it is so backloaded. All the good stuff is in the climax, and everything up to that point is getting us there, but is it gonna be worth the trip? Well, it was, but the trip was not the most important part. Once we got to the destination, this thing took off. Of course, that's me viewing it as an adult. I took my child to it, and she had a great time right from the beginning because there's plenty of slapstick and fun and people getting knocked around, and no small kid is going to be bored by this. So it's only my adult critical mind that's picking apart the first 2/3 of this movie. For a kid, they're probably going to love the whole thing. That's just me. Have you seen Kung Fu Panda 3? What were your thoughts on it? Whatever they were, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Please go ahead, like, subscribe, check out the Council of Geeks podcast on Stitcher and iTunes. And as for me, I will be back as soon as I can get my next fix.